Adam. And of course, when he created Adam, what did he say? It's the only time he said it. He said, "It is not good for man to live alone." You know, it is not good. So, so then he created a suitable partner. You know, and so God, in His intention for the human race, He intended us to be social people. You know, social people, and so that He could accomplish what He planned. You know, His plan was to generate the earth, create the earth and everything. And so, but He also wanted it to reflect Himself. And so, in marriage, He created a union of a husband and a wife, and He brought them together. You know, and that is a marriage. You know, where you consecrate yourself to the other person. You know, and say, I am going to do what God asked me to do. And it always amazed me how He could take a person from California and a person from New York and somehow bring them together and become one. You know, that we think we have this picture in our mind of the ideal woman or the ideal man that I'd like to be united to, you know. But that doesn't happen by accident, you know. Our Heavenly Father doesn't have accidents. He's got a job where if he has one mistake, he loses his job, you know. So He hasn't lost it yet. He is perfect in all that He does, and He is sinless. So what He does in marriage, in the beginning, with our first grandparents and everything, He has created a bonding, a unity where it can be a perfect way to help each other get to heaven. Okay? So now it takes two people to make a marriage work. Now if you get married, you're separated from each other, but then you become one. You know? So in marriage, you are united by the promises you made to each other. The church does not marry anybody. You marry yourselves, and we witness it. The priest witnesses it, and then we bless it. You know, but the church does not marry you. You make promises to yourselves, and all of the relatives and friends that you have at your wedding say, I was there. You know, you can't say you didn't love him or didn't honor him or didn't cherish her, you know, all the days of your life, you know. So we are all witnesses to each other, you know. And so God says in marriage that we can be an instrument of His to accomplish His will. And His will is that we all go to heaven and be with Him, right? You know, and that we live good lives, you know. So it's great to have a partner like my wife. She was always telling me, did you remember to do this? Or why did you do that? You shouldn't have done that. You know, or say this or say that. Wonderful to have a partner in your life that is a true friend, that will tell you what your faults are, you know, and let you know that they got your back. Yeah.
Like when the French toast doesn't taste good?
When the French toast doesn't taste good. Oh, okay, we're talking about cooking now. Yeah, well, you know, that's what they got honey for and jelly.
Evaporated.
Yeah. You put a little bit of Cool Whip on there and some strawberries.
There you go.
It just doesn't matter.
That's right.
You know, but in a sense, you know, we are brought together not by accident. The person that God draws you to is the one he has planned for you. And so that's the mistake we make when we're young. What is it? Eddie Fisher had a song, I did it my way, you know. Well, that way didn't turn out so hot. You know, but I mean, if you say, I did it God's way, you know, thy will be done, thy will be done. And so we should always look into whatever we're called to do to serve God. And so that's where we come to the sacrament of marriage, you know, it is a calling. Well, actually, the class is about vocations. We're on vocations right now. So Father's going to talk about the vocation of holy orders. Mm-hmm. And I'm talking about the vocation of being called by God to serve him in the union of marriage. So it's a holy calling. A vocation is a calling by God to serve him in a particular way. So the priest is serving him in a particular way. And my mother and father came together and they brought 8 children into the world, but they served God and washing clothes and cooking and doing all the things that mothers and fathers do, you know, to help raise up the next generation of the Jorgensen family, you know. And so God, he takes, as we come into the world, as we leave our mother's womb, we have certain talents, certain gifts, whatever, you know. And so God says, I want this particular person to meet this particular person, and I have a plan that they don't even see. It's down the road. 10 years, 15 years, maybe even 100 years, that may not even involve them so much as it does God's plan for the future of the world, you know. And so you have children and grandchildren. So that particular union, that marriage, could bring a saint into the world in 100 years, you know. And that's what happened as we look through history. And God had Abraham, you know, it says, I will bless you, I will bless your family. You will have a family that is as great as the stars in heaven. You can't count them all. And it's farther down the road and you don't even see it. Abraham never saw Jesus Christ, you know. That happened hundreds of years before, you know. But it was all in God's plan. All in God's plan. And so when God brings a particular person into our life and he sows in our heart seeds of love and desire and everything, or that person says, you know, I got to call so-and-so, you know, just to see how to hear their voice, you know, whatever, you know. That's what happens in love. You go through all of this wonderful communication between each other and trying to find out about each other. And so what we have in the Catholic Church is some programs called pre-Cana, where you go through a kind of get to know you period of your life, you know. Before you step in the water, put your toe in and see how warm it is, yeah. You know, to get to know the other person as best you can before you make that final decision. And so with marriage, God wants us to not take it lightly. And he didn't take it lightly. In fact, the first miracle that Jesus ever did was at the marriage of Cana. He turned water into wine. And that was an outward sign. It was one of those things that God wanted us to know, that I bless marriages. I think marriage is probably a more important vocation than the priesthood. You know, because you have so much responsibility. You are the church. You are the domestic church. In the hierarchy of the church, you have the church of the universal church of the world, and then underneath that you have the church of every country, and underneath that you have the church of every diocese, and underneath that you have the church of every parish, and underneath that you have the most important church of all. If it crumbles, all the rest of it falls down. And it's called the domestic church, which is the family. When a man and a woman come together and they seek to do God's will in their life by working together for a common goal of doing God's will, there's nothing more beautiful. Nothing. No vocation that is called to religious life or holy orders or anything is more important than a man and a woman joining together, doing God's will. That's why you come together. Not for your own sake or say, I like the idea of marriage, I want a home, I want this, I want that. It's not that at all. True marriage requires true love. Now I can tell you in my own personal life, when I got married, I thought I knew love, but I didn't. I had no idea. And when my wife passed away 5 years ago, I loved her more on that day than I did when I married her. Because we grew together in love. Little by little, teaspoon at a time, hardships, joys, happiness, it all came together over a span of 49 years, But that's what it is. Time has made us love each other more and more, And I didn't know love until I had to push her around in a wheelchair for 7 years. I had to bathe her, I had to dress her, I had to, give her medicines and cook for her and feed her and everything. So that is, they don't tell you about that when you're young. It's written in the bottom on the marriage certificate. In small type, all of that. But true love comes over time, And of course, so does whiskey and that, and wine, The longer you let it age, the better it tastes. And I always told my children that that life is like a bottle of wine. You should not guzzle the whole thing. You should sip it. Just sip it and enjoy the ambiance of it all. And in my family, I always encourage my children, my grandchildren, and everything to get to know the other family that you're going into, because you're not just marrying one person. I have a friend who is a Catholic priest that came from India, and the father picks the husband for his children, because it's not just two people coming together, it's two whole families coming together, and the daughter has to live with that family. If they're not a good family and they don't have a good reputation and stuff, he doesn't allow that to happen, because it's the most important decision he makes for her, so they don't leave it up to two inexperienced people to make such an important decision. The husband, the mother and father are definitely involved in the decision making. Not like here in America. We do things, because we think it's right. But the important thing to know about marriage, and I can go through here, and I want you to read this chapter 21 that's all about marriage and what the church teaches. It's very important that you understand the church's teachings on marriage, But and the church recognizes a marriage, even if it's not done in the Catholic Church. If it's two baptized people getting married together, the church recognizes that as a legitimate marriage. until it's proven wrong. Now, there are marriages that should not have happened in the beginning. And so the church has set up a tribunal of 3 judges, and they hear the case, and they do a ruling on the case to see if the marriage had proper foundation. See, so the Pharisees came to Jesus and tried to trap him, and said, is it okay for us to divorce our wives and everything, like Moses said? And Jesus stopped them right there and says, hey, this isn't how it was in the beginning. God allowed that to happen with Moses because the people had a hardened heart. He said if they would have had the proper love that they should have been developing over the years, they would not hurt another person. And we talked about that when I taught 10 Commandments, that it's all about love. It's all about love. And so the church says that we accept that the marriage you had before you came into this to become Catholics is a respectable marriage, and that if you want to, and if you got a divorce, then we need to find out why. And so we have this tribunal where witnesses come in and everything and find out if all of the elements of the marriage were legitimate. Or maybe they weren't, I mean, I've known people that got a annulment to their marriage because they married a person that was into drunkenness and drinking before they got married, and then he was an alcoholic. And she didn't know it, But it all surfaced later, after they were married. And of course he couldn't do anything about it, because it's a sickness, it's a disease, And so she ended up, and he would beat her up and everything. There were consequences to the thing. If she'd have known that before she got married, she would have said, no, you're not for me. I'm going to look for another fish in the sea. whatever God's will. And that's where we come to the place that I encourage my grandchildren and my children, I did too, is to date the spouse or the father of when you're marrying, if it's a girl, and if it's a boy, to date the mother, because you as a mother taught your son, your daughter. You taught them. You raised them with the values that they have. And so when you're actually marrying a person, you're marrying the person who raised them, because all their decisions are important decisions that they make were instilled in them from small until they got old enough. And see, so I always, I got a granddaughter who is enamored, in love, and so I told her, I says, well, have you gone on any dates with his father to get to know him? Get to know the man who taught your fiance, because eventually he's going to grow up to be like his father, because that's how he was taught, And so I, and same way with Ryan, who is her fiance, or not fiance. They haven't even declared anything like that yet, but they're heading in that direction. And I said, well, he needs to date your mom. Go on a bowling thing. Go out to a movie. Go wherever. Get to know that person and listen to every word that comes out of their mouth, and realize that this is a chip off the old block. This is somebody that if you were to marry a young lady, you wouldn't know who her mother is, because she raised her as a little girl on up. She said, don't do this, you shouldn't do that, whatever. you know, and then so you have the values that have been instilled into the child from the adult who was responsible for teaching them anyhow. You know, and so you need to go out on dates, go with them, spend as much time as you can and get to know them, because if you don't like the mother or you don't like the parent, then don't marry the child, because you're getting the person who was raised by that person. So in marriage, you know, God has a plan where He wants us to learn to know Him, learn to love Him, and learn to serve Him in the marriage with each other, but not alone. We're never alone. Once we join together as one, then we come into that category where it takes two to make a marriage work. It takes two. And the husband and wife are one. So who's that other person? God. God. You cannot make a marriage work, you know, alone. So God is calling us to work in a trinity, you know, where we all are serving God's plan for our life. And of course, the wife is trying to help her husband get to heaven, and the husband is trying to help the wife get to heaven. And so that's what we're doing, is fulfilling God's plan, not on our own terms, but on the terms that God has already set. Says this union will be a holy union, and it will reflect my love to the whole world. People will look at our marriage and say, I want to be like them people. God is blessing that marriage. You know, I'm going through all these troubles. Why isn't my marriage working like theirs? Well, because they got help from above every day. You know, they live their lives as holy lives, and they practice their faith. And God says, "Come, let's work together. Let's make the marriage a house of God, where your dining room table is the altar by which you worship God. You know, where you have discussions with your children about, what do you think God thinks about this or that? You know, become the facilitator and say, hey, tell me your opinion, you know, but making our marriage a light for other people to see by. Because it's a dark world out there. It's a dark world. People are stumbling over everything, you know, this ideology, this philosophy, whatever. But when we walk with God together, then there's nothing ever to worry about, because we have God's help. He blesses our marriage because it's a reflection of His love for the church. And the church involves all of us. The church is not the building or the stained glass windows or anything. The church is the people. You and me are the church. And God's love is for the church. And the church's love is for God. And so that's the way it is. We use the vocation of marriage to express how we feel about number one. You know, who is number one in our marriage? It's not the other spouse. You know, I mean, if you two were to get married and I was to say, who's your best friend? You say, well, I married my best friend. Oh, no. My best friend is Christ, my Heavenly Father. And I serve my Heavenly Father by serving my husband. You know, my wife and I used to have this contest where we would try to outdo each other in love and in blessings. You know, I mean, she would always be doing something to let me know that she loved me, you know, And we used to have this, we have a contest in my family. It's been going on for 30 years. And the contest is, you have to slip into your conversation the statement, have I told you lately that I love you? And so usually when my phone rings at home, that's the first words I hear. My family, my friends, people who know me say, have I told you lately that I love you? You know, it melts your heart, you know, the whole thing. But quite often we don't tell people we love them. What will they think? You know, that's a stranger. I'm going on 80 years old. People think I'm half crazy anyhow, you know. So for me to say to Robert, have I told you lately that I love you? You know. But then there's one thing to say it, and it's another thing to prove it by your actions. You know, things that you say and do. You know, they're more important. You know. So when you enter into a marriage, and me and my wife, we loved each other until she passed away. Well, actually, I still wear the ring. 5 years later, I'm still wearing my ring, and in my heart, I'm just as married today as I was during those 49 years, you know. But marriage grows in stages, or love grows in stages, I should say. You know, and our Heavenly Father wants us to know that, yes, I love you. Have I told you lately that I love you? And you being here in Rcia today is an expression of God's love for you. You didn't decide to come. He pulled on your heart, and he tugged you until you got here. You know, all the way from Highland, Illinois. You know, but God can do anything. You know, God can do anything. He can change hearts. He's in the heart business, you know that. You know, some people sell automobiles. He's in the heart business, you know. He transforms people. He transforms the heart. And in marriage is a character-building circumstance. It is meant to change you from the person you were to the person God wants you to be. And that is an image of himself. Love, kindness, generosity, mercy, goodness. You get to practice all these things right in your relationship to your best friend, the person that you decide to get married to. So always think of marriage as a vocation and a calling by God. Because not everybody gets called to marriage. It takes a special type of person to live 49 years, you know, and go through the bad times and the good times and have arguments and disappointments and say, and be humble enough to say, you know, I hurt you, I'm sorry. Never let the sun go down on your anger. Never let the sun go down. Always have it in your mind that you'll kiss and make up before you go to bed, you know, because tomorrow's another day. And you may not get it. You don't know. It's not promised. But it's a place where you can grow in love for God by growing in love for your partner. It's icing on the cake. It's the sweetest part. You know, it is, you know. So always think of marriage and pray first. Don't ever enter into a marriage without saying, Lord, is this what you want for me? Show me. You know, guide me, lead me, so that I might be the best that I can be in this union. You know, because it's God's way of saying, I love you just like I love the church. And how did he love the church? He died on the cross. He died. He showed his love for you and me by paying the ultimate price for his promise in marriage. And that's what it is. But when two people come together, they promise. And a marriage is a covenant. It's not a contract where a lawyer is involved, you know. A A covenant means that I will keep my promise to you, even if you don't keep your promise. A covenant is separate than a contract. You make a lifetime commitment to that other person, and even if they don't keep the words that you say, I will love you, I will honor you, I will cherish you, I will be faithful to you, and then somehow they run off with somebody else. Well, your promise was not a contract where a lawyer can come in and say, we're going to the judge and we're going to end this. In your heart, you've made a promise to God. The other person was there, and he or she witnessed it, but your promise is who you are. How you think, how you speak, how you act is who you are. And if you don't, the things you say aren't true, you shouldn't say them at all. But if you promise that I will serve God by serving my partner in life, and it's a lifelong thing. You don't know how long that is going to be, but in my case, it was 49 years that I served my wife, and that I tried to show my love for God by showing my love for my wife. And raising our children, and giving up your hopes and your dreams for the sake of the marriage. The marriage is most important. Most important, and sometimes it's hard to give up control. I want. You have to let that go and say, Lord, what do you want? How do you want me to serve you as a husband or a wife? And come into my marriage. Come into my marriage. And if you've got a family, set out another plate with forks, knives, and spoons so Jesus can be there with you. And use that. There's a place in the ceremony of marriage, and I've seen it a lot, where the proposed husband and wife will have a candle, and they'll go over to the Easter candle at church and light it. And those two candles, they go over, and then they light the one candle, and then they blow out the candle they have. And so and that is the unity, where we are no longer two separate lights of Christ. We become one. And people will see our love for each other and our love for our Heavenly Father and God through our commitment to each other in our marriage. Is there any questions? Okay. Well, I just want to make sure that you have an opportunity to ask, and don't be ever afraid to call me and say, hey, would you explain this a little better? Or what about this? You didn't talk about that, Because I'm talking extemporaneously. I do want you to read the chapter. There are the teachings of the church there. And so it's very important that you understand that it is a vocation, it is a calling by God, and not everybody is called to be married. Just as not everybody is called to be a priest, or a nun, or a doctor, or a lawyer, or whatever. I don't have those skills and talents. God didn't place them in me. But I'm here today, and I'm going to turn this class over to Father Carl, and he's going to tell you about another vocation, but just know that marriage is probably the most important vocation, calling, of all the vocations that there are. Okay? Okay. Well, Father Carl, you have been at Mass.
I have had a Mass this morning, and now I'm here.
My.
Yes.
Well, we're anxious and waiting on pins and needles to hear what you have to tell
All
us.
about. I know he just mentioned the service part of marriage, so there you go. That's what priests and the ordained do, is they serve others. right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the start with. So I'll talk about it for a little bit, but I think you guys probably would have, I think, a lot of questions for me because the priesthood, since it is only men, it's a little bit mysterious, I think, to most people.
Mhm.
And I actually invite you two to ask questions too, because I'm a recently ordained
Oh,
priest,
sure.
and if
Sure.
you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them. But I agree with him, reading the chapter is also very important. So what I want to get us started with is, and he just talked about the vocations, marriage, priesthood, single life, religious life. Is there a section in here? I didn't see one that talks about religious life.
Well, this is
The-
holy.
because
it's-
this
it's
is
called
holy
holy
orders.
orders. It's called holy
But
orders.
we don't talk about the consecrated lives.
Yeah,
Right.
and we usually mix that together.
Oh, okay. That's what I thought. I just want to make sure of that. So holy orders is those orders for men. It's really one order with three orders of ordination, really. So it starts with the diaconate. The diaconate is for men. And I think we've been on and off whether having a diaconate being a permanent diaconate, but in today's church, and it started right after Vatican II, it started up again, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
Do you remember that?
Yeah.
So right after Vatican II is when they started up the permanent diaconate again. It was something that was really formed in the scriptures, and just after the time of Christ. And the permanent diaconate is really called to service in the church, and they can be married, okay? So the permanent diaconate can be married, but they must stay in the state of life, married or not, as they are when they are ordained a deacon. So if they are ordained a deacon and they are single, they must stay single the rest of their life. If they are married, they must stay married the rest of their life. And our current diaconal program, at least in this diocese and probably throughout the United States anyway, the diaconal program starts with making sure that the husbands and wives come together to fully understand what the man is getting into. So the wife has to be a partner to it in a way. She has to fully understand what her husband is getting himself into, let's say, so what he's making his promises to. Now, having been a second career vocation myself, I've never been married. There are some permanent deacons who have chosen many years, and Father Steve Potler is one of them, who chose many years after being, and it was about 10 years, he was a permanent deacon. Then he chose, or felt called, to become a priest. Okay, so he was never married, so he was fully able to do that. So then he went on to the next level of this, the next level of orders, the holy orders, the presbyterate or the priesthood. But that's also true for a permanent deacon who is a widow. Okay, so if he's been widowed, he can also there's nothing preventing him from the church rules from becoming a priest at that point. So I did know some guys at the seminary who both were never married and had been a permanent deacon for several years, many years. And then I also know some who were permanent deacons who were widowed and actually became priests. I do know one person who actually was married and had an annulment on his marriage. And so that gets a little more complicated. And that's a special situation that each bishop would have to really consider, because I can only think of one, to be honest with you, that was in a situation like that. It does not happen very often. So now this is in the Latin Rite Church, which is where we are, the Roman Church. There are other rites, and this is where you're going to read. Now and again you will run into a married priest. I think some of you are from St. Paul and Highland, right?
We went to.
Okay. They used to have a married priest. Do you remember that? Or have you heard about that?
No, never heard of it.
there's one in Vandalia, which you know where Vandalia is, right?
Yes.
Okay, this is Springfield Diocese, so it's not our diocese. But there is one in Vandalia, and he was in Huron just before that. Maybe 3 or 4 years ago, he moved to Vandalia. What happened is he came in from, I think, the Anglican Church, if I'm not mistaken.
Mhm.
And so the Anglican priest can be married. Now, we're not in full communion with the Anglican Church, so he would have had to have something. But as the Pope Benedict brought into our church, the Anglicans who wanted to come in full congregations of faith, which is a very special working of the Pope Benedict. So if you're interested in that kind of stuff, you'd have to kind of read up on that. And so they were allowed to come in. Of course, you know, each individual bishop, and that one probably had to go to Rome, is my guess, is bringing in a married priest. So he brought into this priest. Now they have to be ordained properly because they're ordained by bishops that we don't believe have the same succession in the line of Peter that we have. So they would probably had to been reordained, maybe. I don't know how it worked, but they were brought into the Catholic Church as priest, and so he's a married priest serving in the Catholic Church. And that's a very rare example. A better example is in the Eastern Church, they allow their priests to be married. But they also, like our permanent deacons, the priests have to stay in the state that they were in when they were ordained. And as a practice, most of them are not married. And the bishops never are married. That's as a practice. So that's just something interesting, a little different. So if you do hear of married priests, it is more the exception. So if an Eastern Catholic comes into the Latin Rite and he's married, that's an easier transition because they're in full communion with us, and so they would be able to come in. And you're seeing it now more than 50 years ago when the East was behind an iron curtain, right?
Oh, yeah, everything was
So-
separated.
So that's kind of that's the permanent deacon, and then there's the so-called transitional deacons, and in reality, a permanent deacon and a transitional deacon are the same. We have the same orders. Transitional deacon the term is used, but it just means that we're transitioning to the priesthood. I was a year ago, I was a transitioning deacon. The reality is permanent deacons, transitioning deacons, we're all deacons, we're all the same. So, so transitioning deacon are those who are in the seminary system, and by matter of the way we do it in this country, and especially in this diocese, and even Springfield Diocese, you're ordained for 1 year as a deacon. Now there's, in church rule, it has to be 6 months to be ordained a deacon before you're ordained a priest. And that even that rule can be bent by a bishop. It doesn't have to go to the Vatican. So it's something that can be bent. But it's typically most bishops don't do that. I mean, it's pretty regular. So normally, you're ordained like in May or June, something like that usually, and then the following year as a priest after you finish your last year of seminary. So, what deacons can do, and so this is kind of the sacraments that the deacons can administer, and then as you get up the chain as a priest and then later a bishop, you can administer more of the sacraments. So a deacon can baptize, okay? They can perform marriages, they can witness a marriage, and they can bury the dead, but not in a mass. Okay, and actually in the marriage, they can witness the marriage, but they can't perform the mass. So if you're having a wedding mass, and you want the deacon to witness it, it gets a little complicated because the deacon can only do that part of it, where the priest is there to have the mass. It's not done very often. It's usually only if your uncle is a priest or is a permanent deacon and you want him to witness your marriage, but you still want a full mass. Then that's usually the only time I've actually ever seen that. But you can't have a wedding ceremony outside of mass. I encourage people to have a full mass So,
Well,
but sometimes they don't.
the last time I went to one of those marriages, there was a communion service attached to it.
Right, and that would be with a deacon then, right?
That was the deacon, he performed the marriage, but he had a communion service where the already consecrated host was brought out and.
So then you're still going to have also the liturgy. And we're seeing that more and more in this diocese anyway, where we don't have enough priests. That on Sundays, sometimes you may see a word in Eucharist service, so a deacon will lead that, or we can have lay people lead it also.
Mhm.
But it may be led by a deacon. That's part of the service. So, did I miss any of the sacraments? I guess not.
What's that?
Baptism,
No, well, you got from the womb
baptism and marriage
from
are
the
the
womb
only
to
two
the
that.
tomb, you know,
Yeah.
so you can baptize and you can bury.
Yeah, well, but bury's not even a sacrament, but
Mhm.
yeah. So then a priest, the sacraments they can do then is confessional, Mass, the Eucharist. The ones that I just said the deacons can do. And then marriage and anointing of the sick. Okay, so when you started talking about the sacraments, this is the difference in a deacon, a priest. Then the bishop is the one who confirms and ordains. Okay.
You spoke about a calling.
Yes. So, and I think every vocation is a call. Well, that's the word of vocation means call, right? To call.
Mhm.
So, a vocation, most people that enter the priesthood, I'm not going to say all, we believe that they are called by God to do that. And the church and seminary system takes anywhere between 5 and 8 years, depending on how things are. And in that time, you know, we really discern through prayer, spiritual life, whether God is truly calling us to be the priest, but also the church is determining whether that's a true calling from God also. So it is intense.
So in your personal life, did you feel a calling early in life?
Oh yeah, most people do. Probably. Well, my kindergarten teacher, who's still a friend of mine, said to me when I had my first Mass, she says, "Well, it's about time. You've been practicing Mass since you were in kindergarten." She was there at my first Mass, so in St. Rose, Illinois. So yes. So does that answer your question?
Well, that goes back farther than I was expecting.
As a kindergartner, I visited the school at All Saints Academy back in the fall, and the next time I went into the classroom, this kindergarten little boy says, "I'm going to be a priest when I grow up." I said, "Okay, good." And the teacher says to me, she says, "The last time you were here, you went home and told his parents." I just looked at it, I said, "Tell the bishop when he comes. He'll sign you up."
Well, most of the time I hear of a teenager trying to
Yeah.
think about what am I going to be, what am I going to do, what, you know.
And it's a tough decision because you know you give up a married life and having children, and so that's and it's kind of counter-cultural right now in the American culture. Not so much in the Latin America. It's not as much of a cultural issue, I don't think. Do you?
No, I agree. Most of them are encouraged when you're young to go into priesthood. At least, like, I know my mom. A lot of her cousins went into become nuns
Mm-hmm.
back in the Dominican Republic. So there's a lot of our family.
I've got friends from the seminary from Mexico and Colombia, and it's their seminaries are so full that if you're not like in your mid-20s, you better try to get in the U.S. if you want to still be a priest.
Wow.
So, and they still have high school seminaries where they actually it's all boys school, high school. This is in Mexico. They still have that. So.
Yeah, we used to have a seminary here in Belleville, St.
St.
Henry's,
Henry's.
that was a high school,
Oh, wow.
you know,
High school seminary.
college prep, you know.
And many of the old timers, old timer priests here will tell you that. So the last order then is the bishop. The bishop has to be ordained by another bishop, and those are called by the Pope to become a bishop. So, or through his delegate. but he makes the decision on bishops. The Pope is a bishop. He's the Bishop of Rome. We believe that through apostolic succession that he is in the chair of St. Peter, and so he is the highest bishop amongst all bishops. That's really, but he's equal but not quite equal.
Mhm.
So he's the leader, and so he does have certain responsibilities. So when a priest or a deacon is ordained, and even a bishop is ordained actually, it's by the laying of hands. And so when a priest is ordained at that mass, the bishop will lay his hands on our head like this. It's actually the same for all three. And then also he will rub oil into your hands, consecration oil. So it's consecrating your hands to do these works, to do these sacraments.
When I was coming back into the church, the laying of the hands was one of the things that made me come back to Catholicism.
Oh, good.
Because Bishop Braxton ordained you, right?
Yes.
A Catholic bishop ordained him.
Mm-hmm.
You can trace that if somebody took this thing all the way back to Jesus himself. That's the only church that can do that.
And that's the apostolic succession, and that's what means we can. The bishops had their hands laid on by the original, the apostles, and then down, all the way to a bishop of government. So, and most of them trace their lineage at least 500 years. That's actually available online. You can find that online. You can find their lineage of who what's the opposite of successor? Predecessor bishops. So, the ones that have ordained them. You can find that easily online, actually. So.
Yeah, if you watch a ceremony of a bishop being ordained, usually there's quite a few bishops in the surrounding area that attend.
Yeah, it's usually the ones in their region, which is, in our case, it's Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin is the region that we're in. But then, of course, St. Louis is so close, you're going to have those bishops
Sure.
over.
Yeah.
And an auxiliary bishop, you probably have heard that term. Okay, an auxiliary bishop, he's a bishop. He just doesn't have his own diocese. Okay, he does legally have a diocese, so you'll always see in this, it'll say his titular diocese. So it's like his title diocese, which is a diocese that is kind of defunct. It was a diocese that existed in prehistoric times, not prehistoric times, but in pre-modern times.
That's how I knew Bishop Braxton. I lived in South St. Louis, and he was an auxiliary bishop in St. Louis before he got his own diocese, which was in Lake Charles.
Not all auxiliary bishops are destined to be to have their own diocese, though. That's not why they're being ordained an auxiliary. Isn't a stepping stone. Not necessarily. Oftentimes they are, but not always. Some they're really there to help the bishop and it's largely in sacramental versus administrative type stuff. Because there's, when you're in a larger diocese, Chicago, there's no way the Cardinal Supage can possibly confer confirmation on all the people being confirmed in any given year.
Right.
So that's one of the big roles of an auxiliary is helping with those things.
Once you're a bishop, you're always a bishop.
Yes, normally. we saw Cardinal Carrick.
Yeah. No, I'm thinking we
Yes.
have a bishop in Mascoutah in a retirement home. His
Yep,
name is
Bishop Stan
Schlarman.
Schlarman.
Bishop Schlarman.
He's a priest from this diocese. I've known him since second grade.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was in my parish. I had first communion and confirmation with him.
Mm.
He was a priest here, and then he was made an auxiliary bishop because the bishop here, you wouldn't normally need an auxiliary in a small diocese like this, but he was having some health problems, and so they made an auxiliary bishop to assist with him.
Wow.
And then once he stepped down and they got a new bishop, they didn't need him anymore as an auxiliary, so he went to Dodge City, Kansas. And when he retired there, he came back here to live in our diocese. And He's a very dear friend of mine. Thank you for bringing him up.
Well,
Unfortunately, I can't see him.
I dragged him to the Paul Symphony Hall. He loves
Yes.
good old German orchestra music.
Schwarman. Drummond. So, yeah. And then there's, there's some, by and large, if you're, most, the bishops are either have their own diocese or an auxiliary. There are some bishops that, up in Rome that, or in other larger metropolitan areas that may have other functions, and those are typically administrative type roles. And then the archbishop is a bishop of an archdiocese. And the archdiocese is the one that's in charge of a particular area. So we have an archbishop in an archdiocese in Illinois, and then there's the other diocese in Illinois. And they don't report to him, it's just kind of a grouping. So of course they do look up to him because he is the archbishop, so, and in this case, the cardinal. So, and a cardinal the cardinals are made by the Pope. They are all bishops. I don't think you have to be though, do you? To be a cardinal?
Well, the word cardinal is an advisor to the Pope.
Yeah, so I don't think you actually have to be a bishop, but they are.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Well, there's a couple of the new cardinals that just got ordained decided to remain priests.
So they're not.
They're not bishops. Yeah.
Okay.
I found that fascinating. I didn't know you could do that. I was reading the article.
Yeah. But are they even under 80 though?
No, I think there are over 80.
Yeah.
Oh, and
So
I think that was the
Cardinals,
caveat on that.
yeah. The cardinals get together when the Pope dies to elect the next Pope. But you have to be under 80 years old to be in that meeting. So
there are cardinals that are older.
Yeah,
They
there's a
just
lot
don't
of
have the voting rights.
Yeah, so you can't vote once you're over 80. And some are made cardinals even after they're 80, and then it's totally really a
Ceremonial.
yeah, it's more of a honorary type thing at that point. There might be special reasons for it too. So what a Pope does and what he names cardinals, I don't know. What goes through his head. So that's one of the primary roles of a cardinal is going to be electing the next bishop. Chicago's archbishop is a cardinal citizen. Okay.
Can you explain Monsignor?
Yeah, Monsignor is a title. It's an honorary title. Although it's been abused in certain places.
Mm-hmm.
So sometimes, so there's some places that have many monsignors because the bishop has asked the Vatican to allow them to appoint all these monsignors, and then there's other dioceses such as Milwaukee that has none. They just have a policy of.
I didn't know that.
They have one that was made a monsignor while he was working in Rome. They have one.
That's kind of a French term, you know.
Yeah. Well, actually, Monsignor, I think in French means bishop.
Does it?
I think so. You can Google that.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, okay. So I've talked a lot, and and we don't have a whole lot of time, so I want to answer your questions about the priesthood, especially, or the diaconate, even. I can't really talk about much the bishop. Okay.
I've heard, and I know not so much about becoming a bishop, but I know one of the very interesting facts is that most exorcists are bishops, but some priests have that right because the bishop grants it to them.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit about that? Or?
When we're ordained, we're given what we call faculties, which is what we can do as a priest, the functions that we can do. So I can hear confession, I can say mass, I have all faculties that a priest would normally have. The rite of exorcism is an extraordinary thing, and so there's typically, my understanding is there's typically one exorcist per diocese. Like you said, can be the bishop. But I think it's more often that the bishop actually does delegate,
Oh, okay.
especially in larger dioceses. Now,
Okay.
I'm not how it's done. I'm not sure how that's done in smaller dioceses like us.
There is a rite of exorcism that you go through when you're baptized.
Mhm.
Those of us that are here that are going to be baptized, we're going to have 3 scrutinies just before Easter. And one of those scrutinies has an exorcism in it.
But it's not the exorcism that you're thinking of.
Right.
Because you're thinking about the TV movie, which is real.
Right,
Not the
right.
movie isn't real, but that rite is.
The whole thing, that.
Yeah, and so it does take a person who is, or would you, they dramatized it for the movie, but it is real. There is
Right.
evil in the world. There are people who have been, this does happen, okay? It takes a very strong person, priest, to be able to counter that and to do that exorcism. And so a bishop is not going to lightly give that
Right.
to any priest. It has to be a priest with special abilities and a strong connection with God, because you're fighting evil face to face.
Sure.
So, but anyway,
One of the questions
that's a good
that,
question.
that you might want to know the answer to is there are orders, religious orders,
Oh yes, I forgot
and
about
that there are priests in those orders.
Oh, that, okay.
Okay, so this is a good question, and I forgot. I was going to talk about it. I thought about this yesterday, and I forgot to write it down.
I'm the host of dumb questions.
Thank you.
So I am a diocesan priest, which means I studied for a diocese, the Diocese of Belleville. I was ordained by the Belleville Diocese, and I made a promise to obey, or a promise of obedience to my bishop, Bishop Braxton, and all of his successors. So, I knew at that point he was going to be my bishop for 11 days. But his successor was sitting right next to him, so Bishop McGovern. Now, the difference then between that and an order like, say, Franciscans, or what I'm going to do is show the example that's right around the corner from us here. The Oblates of Mary Immaculate, the OMIs, are right here. So they actually are not studying to be diocesan priests. They are studying to be in a religious order. They take an additional vow of poverty. I take a promise to live a simple life, which is not the same. Sometimes it works out the opposite, though, doesn't it?
I've seen it.
So that's how the religion, and they typically live in community. They share everything, and they live that true Franciscan style of abject poverty is what he lived, and most of them don't do that in today's world. I should say that in this country, because if you go back to your country, the Dominican Republic, you're going to see ordered priests that do live in poverty, right? And they usually have a particular type of charism. Franciscans oftentimes are really looking after the poor, as we know. The Oblates have a particular charism to Mary, because they've got the shrine here too to prove that. The Dominicans are typically teachers. That's a teaching order, right? Jesuits are kind of the scholars, that's what they say.
Yeah, the Jesuits.
And most of those orders have related brothers, and some of them actually you don't even have to be a priest. They all are viewed equally, brothers and priests within the order. So there might be a separate order for brothers, which means they're just single men without having been ordained any a priest or a deacon even. And then the religious sisters, the nuns, are very similar to that. And so they take the same types of vows of poverty, obedience to their mother superior, the priest to their abbot, or whatever the title. They all have different titles, the head guy. But they all try to live in poverty, but they really follow that particular charism that their founder or foundress has created for them. And they're various ones. And a monk is usually, you hear monks, Benedictine monks, I mean, the whole idea is that they live like in a cloistered monastery. And the poor Clares here in town, those sisters seriously do live in poverty and cloistered in.
They usually
They,
live by a rule of some kind,
yeah.
you know.
They have their rules of their order.
Benedict and
So,
Francis had a rule. You know.
and it's, you know, as far as, you know, they report up to their superior, their abbot of their order, or whatever. And then the lines sometimes, you know, it depends on how it's been formed. Sometimes they report up through to some cardinal in the Vatican, sometimes to your local bishop, and it gets very complicated in the church when you start talking about that. But generally speaking, and here in our diocese, the Oblates of Mary, those priests, they also, of course, they can say mass, and so they do help us out. But they usually are not in charge of a parish. When I say usually, it's in extreme circumstances when they are in charge of a parish. Usually, they'll be in charge of a parish if it fits in with their charism. So in East St. Louis, we have, what is it?
Well, he's a Franciscan down there.
Yeah, what's the parish?
Oh, it's St. Augustine's a Hippo.
Okay, St. Augustine of Hippo Parish in East St. Louis the pastor there is actually Franciscan. But that falls in their charism of really living amongst the poor and the needy. It's a needy neighborhood. So that's when you'll see that, is when I have a guy I knew from seminary. He was teaching there when I started, and he left, and he's at a parish in Chicago, a very similar situation. He's actually Franciscan, and you know, it falls into their charism. The bishop actually asked him, or their order, to take care of the parish that was. They have special needs for that most diocesan priests just don't necessarily have that skill set. That's a good question. Okay, we're actually out of time, but I'm going to let you ask any other question real quick.
Yeah, so you can marry? Is that correct?
I cannot.
Oh, you can.
No,
Okay.
priests cannot marry.
Priests cannot marry.
Unless you were married, the Eastern Church, that's the only time it really happens, that they come over into the Latin Church.
Okay, but you can do confessions.
Oh, I'm sorry, you meant, can I perform a wedding?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, oh yes, I can do that. So everything that a deacon can do, I can do.
Okay.
Plus, so I can do all but confirmation and holy orders.
Okay.
I can do all the other 5 sacraments. And confirmation, if the bishop delegates it to me, I could do it. And last year, Bishop Braxton delegated to all the bishops of the diocese. I wasn't a priest at the time. Delegated to all the priests of the diocese that they could do confirmations in their own parish because of the pandemic.
Well,
So-
yeah, and some of the smaller towns that are far away and everything, they can't come to the cathedral where the bishop is, and he
Yeah, no, Braxton never delegated that.
he didn't.
Confirmation was never delegated, just this one time.
Oh my.
Yeah, I can't say never, but it is not.
So,
It
well,
was
usually
also-
on Easter.
So,
the
now
vigil-
confirmation, when you're coming into the church, then it's delegated to the priest automatically. So,
But on Easter we baptize and confirm
Yeah.
normally together.
And that's really the
all the
only
new
time.
Christians.
that's the only time that it's delegated.
That's the only time.
Yeah, when it's the normal process, 8th graders or 7th
Mhm.
graders, then it's the bishop. In this diocese, every diocese is a little bit different. Springfield, they're changing it anyway, so confirmation's at 3rd grade now, I think, isn't it? Or 2nd grade?
I heard that was like,
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, they're doing confirmation before.
Yeah, I think they're doing,
Christmas.
it's either 2nd or 3rd grade, they've changed it, it's in the process of change. It was supposed to change in last spring, and then COVID came and it all got,
I got
So,
confirmed.
we-
I was 16.
Yeah.
I was normal. I was the military diocese, so I don't know
yeah.
if they do that.
Well, Milwaukee Archdiocese is 15, 16, junior high school. Okay, but I digress, so. Sure, you have other questions on the priesthood.
I just have one. I've heard it a few times, and it's not so much a challenge as a curiosity. Why is absolution not able to be given over the phone, like for confession?
Well, how can I assure one that you're truly repentant? without seeing you.
Right, okay.
And two, the anonymity of it.
Mhm.
I mean, how do I know whether you're on speakerphone or not?
Mhm.
I mean, there's just so many technological reasons for that I, okay, I can't tell that a person is truly repentant by not seeing them in the confessional if they're on the other side of the screen, but I can certainly hear it in their voice.
Right.
And there's a difference between, at least I can hear their live voice.
Mhm.
There is, it raises a lot of good questions, like you said. But yeah, I agree with the policy that we have.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Like I've heard of it before, the seal of confession.
Well, yeah, that's a whole other factor is,
Yeah.
and how do I know that the government isn't taking those conversations?
Yeah, it's true.
I'm not a conspiracist, okay?
No text messaging.
That's right.
Can you imagine? It's on you.
Confession by text, that's how.
Everybody knows what happened in that confession.
Oh my goodness.
But I mean, personally, I wouldn't want to do my confession over the phone because,
Right.
yeah, because I mean, phone calls can be intercepted. Let's face it. In
Yeah.
reality, I'm not a
Big
conspiracist.
brother,
thinking
Big
that
Brother
everyone
is always
but-
watching.
That's right.
Well, it's time for us to go.
Yeah, thank you.
If you ever have questions about the priesthood, don't hesitate after we chat in. I know Sister handed these out. If you have other questions, let me know.
My wife probably here.
How old is Joseph?
He's 20.
Oh, so he can still be a priest. You're not married, are you?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. We'll sign you up.
You already got the halo, you know.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Father.
Did you get the message about Jessica?
Yeah,
Her
she
baby?
congratulations on the
Yeah,
baby.
good.
And
Is it a
Joseph.
boy or a girl?
A boy, little Joseph White the Fourth.
Joseph?
Yep. They call him JJ, and apparently he squeaks before he cries.
Okay, so, but in all seriousness, vocation is a calling, so vocation to marriage or to single life or religious life or to the priesthood, even the permanent diaconate, they're all callings. So I don't think most people spend much time thinking about talking to God before they make a major decision in their life, and I think that's important. So, praying on it.
Certainly.
Hey.
Hey, Joseph.